Alright, let's cut the crap. Here's how this video is going down. I'm ranking 44 different styles from the Yakuza series, ranging from 0, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, 3, 4, and 5 remastered, 6, Gaiden, Pirate Yakuza, Judgment, Lost Judgment, the Kaito files therein, Ishin, and 2 styles from Infinite Wealth as well. And Date and Haruka. That makes 44. It'll make sense as we go along. You may wonder what criteria I use to judge these styles, and the answer to that is, it'll kind of be explained as I go throughout the video. But the broadest criteria that I judge these styles on is it fun? If it isn't, you'll see it rank low. If it is, it'll rank high. I don't think I can... Look, I'm gonna be real. This video took the life out of me. I know it doesn't seem like it's that much, but just being completely vulnerable here, this took me a while. Scripting and just laboring over every little decision that went into every... This video's been a lot, all right? I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm definitely not saying that. What I am saying is just understand that when you're watching this, it's something more than the sum of its parts. It's a guy at his wit's end. But at the end of the day, I hope you enjoy it. So let's get into my personal ranking of these Yakuza combat styles. Starting with F tier, there's a collective total of 1 style here. If you're familiar with the fighting styles in this series, you can probably take a stab at what it is. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present the only fighting style in all of Yakuza that actively makes me mad. Of 44 different combat styles in the entire Yakuza franchise, spanning across 14 different games, how does one of the most creative, diverse, and unique characters in gaming rank dead last? Well, there's a very simple reason for that. Majima's combat in Kiwami 2 isn't creative, diverse, or unique. Not only is it a rehash of his legend style from Zero, that being the Mad Dog style, but it strips away some of the most fun tech from that style and leaves us with this. The obvious point of contention is the lack of upgrades, which isn't even close to the worst part, at least to me. After all, you couldn't upgrade Mad Dog and Zero either, beyond leveling up stats for all the styles, so what exactly makes this style so horrible? Well, only the final rush combo finisher now actually leads into a neutered version of Savage State where he runs around, meaning most of your combos leave you dead upon ending. And even when you're in Savage State, you can't do the chomp attack out of it, so it becomes worthless. Same thing goes for his massive guard evade, which is completely gone. Because of the removal of Chomp, your crowd clearing ability has gone from decent to basically non-existent. To compensate for this, they made his tornado move cost no heat, at the reverse cost of sucking at dealing with crowds, despite the fact that it's the only move in this kit that can even remotely deal with them. On the topic of controls that were changed or removed, the controls are in general incredibly stiff, not letting you dodge cancel out of any of your moves when that should be the standard for someone like Majima, especially when Kiryu can do this in this game. You get a collective total of 2 heat actions with him, both of which are notably reused and worse. One of them is when you're just facing a single enemy, and the other is this classic triple finisher, which, because of the lack of vignettes and poor audio balancing, lacks any impact. Same goes for his Demon Fire counter stab, which is transformed from the best move in his arsenal to a footnote amongst footnotes. Majima in Yakuza Kiwami 2 is a static, awkward, worthless style, and is easily the worst combat RGG has ever made. The Ibuchi dynamic intro is sick as hell, though. I'm pretty sure that's the angriest I'll ever be on film. I have a lot of problems with some of the upcoming entries, but I promise not to be as vitriolically angry as that again. How about we take things easy for this next one, and go on a little island resort vacation. I do love me some worse slugger, after all. Man, why did things have to be this way? Ichiban's Dondoko Island combat is just really bad for a multitude of reasons, but I do want to talk about why it isn't dead last. Not only does it actually technically work, but it's got a fair amount of utility to it. It's used for collecting resources and clearing up trash outside of just beating up pirates, so it's actually got purpose outside of just throwing hands. With that being said, this combat is still really bad, man. Solely from a beat-em-up combat perspective, I have to ask, how do you go from Lost Judgment to this? No heat, no finishers, basically nothing. Just a 4-hit combo and a dodge. That's it, and all this in a series widely renowned for its intense beat-em-up combat. That's kind of insane to me. I can excuse it though, because this was built from the ground up. It's not like there was a more fleshed out bat-based fighting style that they could have ripped from to make this a little more interesting. If you ignore Slugger style from Zero, that is. I mean, did they think we would have minded a little reuse of assets? There couldn't have been at least a little more sauce than none at all? Hey, advantage over Kiwami 2 Majima though, you can actually upgrade this one. And you've technically got multiple battle themes here? Oh, you spoil me, Infinite Wealth. Okay, so this one is probably objectively worse than the previous two, but I had to rank it higher for one reason and one reason only. Date is really funny. Calling Date's combat bad in Kiwami is like calling a spade a spade. Like, not only is it bad, but it was kind of designed to be that way. Does that give it a pass? Of course not. Style only outranks quality when the quality is high to begin with. Or, you know, the style complements the quality. That being said, you've got a 3-hit combo, the same as Ichiban previously, I know I got that bit wrong, stop typing, and a heavy attack. However, if you finish a move or combo and immediately start pressing other buttons, you'll drunkenly fall to your knees and have to climb back up to normalcy, meaning that technically speaking, yes, there is tech here. Again, objectively speaking, this is probably the worst style in the series, so why did I rank it above the other two but not any higher? Well, it's this low out of necessity. It's horrible, no doubt there. That being said, you can only ever fight 3 guys with it, and this caps off what is easily, at least in my opinion, the hardest challenges in Kiwami, those being the Proving Grounds. After slogging your way through playing as Chip Zanuff, to playing DMC2 as Mr. Beast, and finally protecting the scantily clad Beetle Woman, your ultimate combat reward is this dumb, non-functioning piece of crap, and to me, that's hilarious. Also, despite being bad, his animations are at least goofy to look at, and his downed enemy kick is surprisingly effective in this. Still, he's nothing more than a drunkard with a banger theme. My apologies, you beige-clad Giga Chad. Okay, now we're officially out of one-off territory and into styles you'll find yourself using throughout the game. That being said, what do I think is the worst general combat style in the Yakuza series? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's Ishin's brawler style. In Ishin, you get 4 styles. You have a sword, you have a gun, you have a sword, and a gun. And then there's neither, that's Brawler. I feel like the problems with Brawler in this game should be obvious, but in case you haven't figured out yet why not using your sword, gun, or both at the same time isn't the best idea, let me put this very plainly. Your damage in this style is abysmal, unless you're wearing the Fundoshi, at which point it becomes tolerable at best. Unlike its stylistic contemporaries, you can't upgrade a weapon to improve your overall stats, leaving Brawler in the objective dust as the game goes on. The only consistent argument I've seen for this style is, ironically enough, its actual level of style. You know, the sheer joy one can get out of hitting your enemies with your fists in a game balanced around anything but using your fists. And maybe I'm just a pragmatist, but I don't think imposing a challenge onto yourself in the name of flair necessarily constitutes a better style. Also, I can't be the only one who finds the finishing hit sounds in this style to be weirdly unsatisfying, right? You're gonna see a lot of reused, drawn-out heat actions in this style, considering how contextually ubiquitous its very few heat actions are. Its unique heat ability, Dragon Wing Sortie, is also arguably the weakest in the game, considering how easily it can be blocked. You know, considering your enemies are using swords, and you are not. I know it probably sounds like I hate this style, like it should be lower, but there's 2 things that prevented me from giving it any further crap. First, and most importantly, compared to the previous 3 styles, this technically works. It's not horrendous to control or anything, it just has crap damage being its main drawback, which sucks, but it's better than being actively unfun to control. Secondly, its only saving grace as a style is the parry, which gives you a buff that lasts a fair bit and can chain somewhat well into other superior styles. I feel like it's kind of telling that this style's arguably best ability is Sheathed Blade, which is an endgame ability that lets you more effectively switch to another, better style. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Ishin's Brawler. Also, how did you manage to mess up the Tiger drop? Like, come on, man. I'm not crazy. Despite being the internet's most outspoken Yakuza 5 apologist, I can't deny that Haruka still isn't really fun to play as. And yes, I somehow think this is more comparable to Yakuza's normal combat than the turn-based combat, and no, I won't explain that, but thanks for playing. I can respect what they tried to do here, as it was a really honest gamble that just didn't pan out. By the same token, I can't enjoy the end product because, good lord, this is the simplest, most sterile rhythm game I've ever played. Maybe it's rude to say, but I find it hilarious that they went from this to arguably one of the most engaging rhythm games in the form of Yakuza 0's disco dancing. But I digress. It might sound like I'm stalling, but honestly, I've got nothing to really say about this. It is a rhythm game. It is boring. You're gonna get sick of hearing so much more by the end of Haruka's segment. It's still more enjoyable than using the previous 4 styles in my eyes. I think we can move on to the C-tier stuff. The styles in C-tier aren't bad per se, but they're not ones I find myself wanting to use or return to. These styles can be outclassed by other styles, they need to be upgraded before you can definitively call them useful, or they're just flat out not that fun to use overall. So consider this the meh tier. That being said, to kick off C tier, we have the grindiest style in the series, or second grindiest, depending on your minigame preference. I feel like asking how this happened is an easy question, but I already know the answer. Dragon in Zero falls victim to the same mechanic that plagues the rest of Kiryu's combat in this game, the dreaded heat gears. 3 of Kiryu's styles in this game are affected by this, and 2 within that context get it significantly worse than the others, that being absolutely molasses level attack speed. To counteract this, you're actually quite fast in heat, being able to generate it somewhat quickly with the unique twist counter, and starting with double finishers. The problem arises when you realize that to play Dragon optimally, you have to drain your heat constantly for the heat actions. When you're in heat, regardless of the gear, your attacks get better but your damage is still mediocre. So naturally, you'd use heat actions, but don't actually do that because doing that drains your heat down to nothing again, making you needlessly slow. Dragon in Zero just goes back and forth like this, feeling like absolute dog water, a brief moment of unbridled power only to fall back down into previously mentioned dog water. And it's just a failed Sisyphean experiment within the failure that is the heat gear system. And this is without even mentioning the Iron Fist counter, which both drains your heat at max level and also has a high tendency to just not work. Or Serenity, a move that lets you dodge and taunt, draining all your heat instantly. These games will sometimes incentivize being in a calm state in order to preserve weapon durability or to avoid being knocked down. But not only does Zero give you no such buff in this style, but not having heat actively hinders you, making every other ability in this style a hindrance and a waste. Positives include the surprisingly helpful twist counter that, while not great damage-wise, is at least decent at heat generation, and the surprisingly helpful knockback counter ability. It's cool that this style is here, but I wouldn't use this over any other style that Kiryu has. Also, just screw the legend style switching in this game. You know, I recently went back to Yakuza 3 to try and get a better feel of the combat, because I thought I and many others were quite harsh about it. You know what I learned? We weren't. Kinda. Having the context of how 3 was made, how it's not optimized from Kenzan, and how much better Kiryu feels in 4, I can sufficiently say I understand what they were trying to do here. I just think they failed, is all. There's no one central problem with Kiryu in this game, but rather a large selection of things that just drag him down. From a general gameplay standpoint, there's inevitably the blocking, which I guess you could bypass with weapons similar to Kenzan, but durability is a real kick in the dick in this game. And then there's your heat action damage, which ranges from solid on random street encounters to abysmal on bosses. Playing Kiryu in Yakuza 3 can be fun, but falls subject to one of the main tools I used to judge the quality of these styles, that being that he really needs to be upgraded before he becomes really usable. Maybe this is just a problem with the games where you only have one character and one style specifically, as you'll see later, but you start out this game with an absolute nothing sandwich. And even then, XP is super grindy at high levels when you want to max everything out. You don't start with double finishers, which are a necessity because of the blocking, namely because doing the triple light combo into double finishers is the most consistent method for dealing with any and all enemies. Your grab kinda sucks in this game, despite what some people will tell you. Your bounding throws both require and drain heat, which is something that I'm truly never really a fan of. Heat actions in this game vary between cool to lacking any impact at all, like seriously, what the hell happened to Essence of Butt Breaking? And even at high levels, you simply don't deal enough damage to compensate for your slow combo speeds. There are silver linings though. As I said, I understand what they were trying to do here. There's a couple neat calm state abilities, and while they don't really justify remaining in a calm state, they are pretty cool. Your upgrades come from all over the place, which means the game actively encourages you to explore the world, despite the sometimes negligible difference the upgrades make. Some of the heat actions this game introduces are really cool, a personal favorite of mine being Essence of Cigarette. And I actually think the extra heat attack upgrades are really interesting, and I'm kinda surprised they scrapped it in favor of the mastery mechanic in the next game. Still, because of the poor damage and the necessity of upgrades for the style to become at least a bit usable, I unfortunately have to rank Yakuza 3 Kiryu this low. But hey, look at it this way, 3 defenders, it could have been worse. Also, thank you to my buddy Choco for helping me get footage for Yakuza 3, 4, and 5. It was a massive help on his part, but I mainly just want to show you this so you guys understand that I do in fact work with the dumbest fucking people on planet Earth sometimes. Alright, you know what, that's enough of that, let's move on. Funnily enough, would you believe me if I told you there was a Yakuza game that was also a multiple of 3, and its problems stem from the exact opposite places the last entries did? Look, all I'm saying is, we've really come a long way with the Dragon Engine. Having the context of how 6 was made, how it's not optimized due to starting from scratch, and how Kiryu feels marginally better in Kiwami 2, I can sufficiently say I understand what they were trying to do here. No, we're not doing that. So, here's the other big game with only one style that isn't balanced particularly well. Yakuza 3's main issue was its lack of any substantial options to get through the combat, which is already not a feeling you want to instill in the player. Having to start from the ground up with a new engine in Yakuza 6, you'd think they'd have learned their lesson, and I think they learned it a little too well. You start the game with double finishers this time around, and they don't cost heat, which is cool, and you deal decent damage, so clearly my issue isn't any of that. No, instead my problem is the horribly unoptimized tools available to you, how difficult it is to earn experience points, and how wildly both of these previous issues swing between true and false. Also, the upgrade system in this and Kiwami 2 sucks just major balls. With your health, attack, defense, evasion, and heat generation all being tied to 6's horribly slow upgrade economy, especially having to deal with buying other upgrades and moves on top of that, it's likely these stats won't see much of an increase throughout the entire game. On top of that, there's also the fact that playing the game normally simply doesn't net you enough points to upgrade most anything. You have to Rizap grind and or do the clan creator, which isn't great, I'll say. However, once you start doing those two things, your XP will fucking skyrocket in like one tree, at which point you gotta grind the other ones up. In terms of the actual combat, to be honest, I'm just not super big on this take on the dragon style. The charge attack is genuinely really bad in this. Your finishing hold, while good at dealing with groups, is buggy as shit, and you'll drop the enemy you're swinging halfway through the animation like 90% of the time, and yeah, I'm not even gonna pretend the heat system in this game makes any sense. On the other hand of your move list, you have some of the most broken moves in Yakuza's history. I'm wholly convinced, I'm not gonna do this myself, but I'm wholly convinced that you could beat this game with just extreme heat, evasion strike, and dropkick. It's a bit better than Yakuza 3's combat by virtue of having moves that break the meta as opposed to not having any particularly strong moves at all, but it's hard to justify placing the world's angriest dad any further than this. Oh god, I hate this song. Alright, let me make this crystal clear before I keep talking. I love this mechanic. Not only is it really funny that in this turn-based game, Kiryu gets his turn to be based, but it's also played with in a really interesting way in the Tojo Trio fight, which is one of my favorite fights in the entire series, partially thanks to this mechanic. Purely from a conceptual standpoint, Dragon's Resurgence is an awesome mechanic, but there are 3 things that tear it to shreds in my eyes. One of which is kinda minor, one is justifiable but still annoying, and the other reason might sound petty, but I genuinely think it ruins this entire mechanic. First of all, did you know that increasing your bond with your party members lengthens the duration of the surge? It's fine if you didn't, because despite being the only way to upgrade this style outside of leveling up Kiryu, the game never explains this as a mechanic. And yeah, you'll be incentivized to do the drink links and party chats simply because they're easy, fun, and not intrusive, but it would have been nice to have this mechanic explained somewhere. Ham it up with some real my friends are my power BS. Secondly, why is it locked to the extreme heat flurry from Yakuza 6 and Kiwami 2? I get this is the limit breaker mechanic, as is extreme heat in those prior games, but it just feels like it limits your moveset. No finishing holds, one rush combo that doesn't aim itself at downed enemies. It's not a big problem, but I would have liked to have more variety, maybe changing it up depending on which style Kiryu's in when he activates it. Third, and most importantly, Bishop Violet Velveteen. That's not a question, it's a statement. Every time, and yes, I do mean every time you manually activate this ability, Bishop Violet Velveteen from Yakuza 6 will start playing, and I swear to God, it genuinely ruins this style for me. Street enemies, it plays. Standard boss, it plays. Final boss, and you're trying to soak in End of Denial because it's a legitimate banger? Fuck you, dick punching music. I didn't hate this song initially, I found it to be a fun, rock-intensive power trip, but being forced to listen to it over every use of Dragon's Resurgence, it made me hate the song. You know, like with so much more with Haruka. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but I'm saying I've never seen Haruka and Dragon's Resurgence in the same room together. Not helping is the fact that when I write scripts, I'll listen to the music of what I'm writing about, so I've had to listen to this like 10 more times on top of it all. While it may be funny, Bishop Violet Velveteen, the style, really fumbles it when it comes to being enjoyable. If I hear this song one more time, I'm going to defund local soup kitchens. I swear to God. Gimmicks. Thoughts? Having the context of how Gaiden was made, namely in a cave with a box of scraps, how it's somehow not optimized even though it's starting from an already established format, and how this combat style feels marginally better in Pirate Yakuza, I can sufficiently say I don't know if I understand what they were trying to do here. That's the last time I'm gonna make reference to that. Probably. Agent style is arguably the most inconsistent, gimmicky style in the series, trumping stuff like Sea Dog and Wild Dancer, solely because of how infrequently this style's main gimmicks combo into one another. From a basic combat perspective, I feel like Agent is intentionally lacking because of how interesting it thinks its tools are. Your combo speed is pretty good, but you simply don't deal enough damage to warrant pretty good combo speed. In a world of strength versus dexterity, Agent chose the dex route, but forgot that having some strength is part of the deal. While this can be worked around thanks to this style's extreme heat buff being shockingly useful actually, it's mediated by the fact that heat is both incredibly slow to generate and is extremely easy to expend. Granted, in this footage I have the War God Talisman, which negates this, but it's not something you'll have on in an average playthrough considering you gotta beat the Amon fight in order to get it. Speaking of extreme heat actually, let's get into the main gimmick with this style, the gadgets themselves. The first one, that also serves as my personal favorite, is the Spider Wire, which is actually really fun in the right situations, and thankfully it has a multitude of uses. You can hit a couple of enemies by swinging the enemy you've bound with the wire either left or right, and if you want to deal high target damage to one person, you can reel them in and start an aerial combo. Also, I forgot to mention this in the script, but I have footage of this, you can actually steal weapons off of guys. While it doesn't work against bosses, I would be lying if I said I didn't have the most fun in this style using this gadget early game to do aerial combos. Granted, Yakuza charged finishers do this better, but let's ignore that for right now. Next up is the Hornet drone, which is hilarious and not at all applicable. Not only can the drones be destroyed by most enemies in one hit, even with the durability upgrade, and not only do they kinda suck damage-wise, but they spawn rather slowly as their spawn time decreases the longer you spawn them interrupted. That being said, extreme heat mode with this one is hilarious, making me feel like Mysterio in Far From Home, you know? After that, you unlock the Firefly Bomb, which kind of proves my problem with all of the gadgets. This thing is way too clunky to use actively. Yes, I know the extreme heat version is destructive and stylish as hell, but I've already addressed why I'm not trying to take that into account. Because you're going to have to be backing up to use this in standard combat without, getting hit yourself, enemies will run right past these things and get in a couple licks on you because the cigarettes just don't explode fast enough. That's about all she wrote on that one. And lastly are the Serpent Shoes, which are a set of rocket boots that are incredibly cumbersome to use and unsatisfying to do anything with. I know that's a pessimistic way to end that, but I just don't really like Serpent. Agent has some fun tools like Spider and some extreme heat attacks, but overall this is easily one of the most simultaneously gimmicky and cumbersome styles in the series. If only a certain pirate game improved upon this concept. Well, guess it didn't take long for me to keep complaining about Yakuza 0's heat system. It's around this point in the list I want to start focusing more on the positives of the styles, because I like all the styles from here on in to a certain extent, even if we're not fully out of C tier yet. That being said, I can't talk about what makes Russian Zero fun without acknowledging what holds it back: the ever-dreaded aforementioned heat gears. Despite being the speed-centric style, your combo speed, like Dragon, sucks without any heat. Even then, you need to be at high gear before this style becomes viable, which is tough considering how easy it is to lose heat in this style. Most notably, your quick steps barring the first one consume heat, meaning the central mechanic speed focus of this style is hindered by the mechanics of the game itself. There's also significantly less things to do in heat outside of having a faster combo speed due to the cutbacks on heat actions. Your grab is replaced with the limp kick, which, while it can break guards, kinda sucks at it considering how hard it is to combo it into actual combat due to how friggin' slow it is. By proxy of not being able to grab enemies, you also can't pick up anything off the street, and your overall damage output is pretty middling. However, there's still a fair bit to like about Rush in this game. While I personally didn't get this sensation, there's definitely something to be said about the risk versus reward mechanic this style presents. Swallow Spirit definitely helps engage you a bit more with this mechanic, due to it giving you heat when you dodge an enemy's attack at the right time, similar to Secret of the Crane. This style also synergizes surprisingly well with Knuckle-type weapons, which can really turn the tides of the style with higher-tier Knuckle variants. And I'm also just kind of a sucker for weapons in this series, as you'll come to find out. I like how your standard guard is replaced with a brief weave, well distinguishing it from other guards in the game, and giving Kiryu 3 unique guards for his 3 main styles. The heat actions you do get are pretty cool. I'm especially fond of Crushing Elbow, and the concept behind this all is definitely interesting, as evidenced by how good it is in Kiwami 1. Ultimately, due to the amount of work that needs to be put into this style to make it worth using alongside the rest of your kit, because apparently they thought making Crushing Elbow cost 1 billion yen was a fun idea, and because of how slow you are when you're not in heat, this speedster's dream of a style ironically ends up in the dust. I'd be lying if I said I think I have a respectable reputation on this site. From ranking Ryukyu humming last place in my standard themes list, to ranking Slash second last in my Majima themes lists, I know there's a couple people out there who've written me off as an absolute hack. I say this because if I had any modicum of respect before this, it's gone now. Impressed at how I haven't been murdered yet? Listen, I'm not saying I hate Dragon style in Kiwami, but there are some undeniable flaws that really showed their fangs to me the deeper I dug. Let's get this out of the way first. This is, at one point, the worst style in the entire series. When you start Kiwami proper, that being post-time skip, you have a 2-hit rush combo, no heat actions, no heat generation, your dodge doesn't even dodge stuff, and for some reason, you still start this style with the bullshit heat-draining taunt known as Serenity from Zero. However, as the game goes on, the style becomes better as you engage more with the Majima Everywhere mechanic, which can become tedious as you seem to find yourself hunting Majima more than he hunts you. Alongside this, you'll also be working through the Komaki Coliseum scrolls to unlock new abilities, and eventually this style becomes really good. And see, weirdly enough, my biggest problem is that last thing. At some point, Dragon in this game becomes the most versatile, universally applicable style in the game. I realize now I forgot to explain why I think this is a bad thing, and the reason for that is because in a game with multiple styles, you don't want one that's just generally more applicable than the others because you want to be switching constantly, and that's what something that Lost Judgment gets right. Look, we'll get there eventually, but just, keep enjoying the video. Actually, I say at some point, but we both know when it is, the Tiger Drop. In an effort to not beat the dead horse that is Tiger Drop jokes, I need to come clean here. If Dragon didn't have this move, it would be significantly worse. Your double finishers and bounding throws require heat, you're still really slow without heat, even if it is more manageable than at the start of the game. And there's a genuinely good handful of moves in this style that range from underwhelming to outright useless, like Time for Yinglong, Komaki Parry, and Charged Finisher. It might sound like I hate this style, but like I said earlier, I don't. I need to clear this up. Tiger Drop spam is genuinely really fun, at least for the first few hours, and cheesing the Amon fight. I'd rather have an absolutely hilariously overpowered move among a sea of mediocrity than, say, a host of cumbersome gimmicks that don't really work, or having the music you're listening to be drowned out every time you use the style. I know this is universally a fairly beloved style, and I totally get it. I really do. I just can't stop and smell the roses when the bush around them aren't trimmed or cared for. That being said, let's move on to the B tier. Alrighty. Welcome to the B tier. From here on in, I'm going to try and be mostly positive about all these styles, because this marks a turning point. I know being this low on a list with this many entries probably makes it seem like whatever I place here is subpar, but this series is shockingly consistent when it comes to the combat, with a couple of the previous notable exceptions. So yeah, things are looking up from here, so consider this the official good tier. Keyword though, I'm going to try and be more positive. Which may be tough, because first we gotta talk about... What can I say about Crane and Judgment? Yeah, that about sums her up, eh? With all of your combat skills in this game being on one page, you'd think it would be tough to cram a ton of variations between the unique Tiger and Crane skills. Apparently, RGG thought the same thing, at which point we encounter Crane's biggest drawback: it has absolutely no unique upgrades. A good few of the interesting looking upgrades in this game are only applicable to Tiger, making this game's styles feel less like two equally balanced tools and more like Tiger plus one. Not helping Crane is that Judgment is one of the worst games in the series when it comes specifically to the goddamn bounce blocking, which Tiger can thankfully bypass with Flux Fissure not bouncing, or even piercing guards with a charged finisher. Crane is an unfortunate victim of circumstance in this game, which honestly really sucks because I think this style is really cool. Sure, it's no Akiyama with the way that you kick, but similar to something like late game Wild Dancer and Ishin, your light combo loops forever if you just keep hitting it, which is a really interesting gimmick. You can use this to repeatedly strike at enemies on the ground, or use Tiger to launch and combo with it from there, which I actually did to finish off one of the final bosses in this game. There's also the matter of the EX boosted heavy combo, which basically lets you take out 3 guys from the encounter immediately, or in a boss fight lets you take out 2 of his goons and deal massive damage to the boss himself. Thankfully, the triple finisher isn't Tiger locked, so you do get to take advantage of more of Crane's kit. And generally speaking, the style is quite floaty in a very fun way, with some of your finishers just straight up making you jump and or dodge over some of the enemy's attacks. Unfortunately, all this interesting utility is neutered when you remember bounce blocking and nothing unique. Thankfully, Lost Judgment happened and we got to see Crane soar, but we'll get there when we get there. For now, unfortunately, Crane ranks at the bottom of B tier for me. Tanimura. Too technical for the game's own good, was it? This list was quite interesting to make because even as I kept writing it, placements kept changing. To that end, Tanimura was originally just below Rush and Zero when I first started writing, but after a very recent revisit to Yakuza 4, I came to the conclusion that he's not as bad as I gave him credit for. Or I guess a lack of credit for. While I will highlight the upsides first, I will say this: Tanimura is a fun character when played to his strengths, but those strengths are hard to play to. While it's tempting to be overcritical about a lack of double finishers, a few of the ones you have knock the enemy back or down, which can naturally lead into a longer combo thanks to the god tier mechanic that is wall bounding. And even if you don't do that, there's also the skill Essence of Combos, wherein all of your finishing blows naturally combo into heat actions. There's also Essence of Arresting, which has arguably shown some of the most love out of any heat action in the series by virtue of having a separate skill called Breezy Arrest, which solely exists to make this one easier. From a purely technical standpoint, Tanimura is awesome, and I love that. Unfortunately, he's got a fair chunk of drawbacks. I'll be the only one to say this, I don't really care for his parry that much. While you can lead into a wall bound with it, most of the time I end up parrying by accident and just kinda have to adjust from there. There's also the matter of bosses or generally tougher enemies being able to recover faster than you can after a successful parry, meaning it just gets dealt a crappier hand. On top of that, there's also the heat action you can do out of parrying, which guaranteed does not kill no matter the enemy's health, which can also really screw you over. This is all a pretty big issue considering it's his main gimmick. There's a couple other tools that he has that are either unique to him or reused and tweaked just enough to be a bit worse though. His gun taunt, while cool to look at, leaves you completely vulnerable for a couple seconds while doing it, unlike stuff like Akiyama's, which are so contextually specific, the enemy won't have the chance to attack. Also, Akiyama's gives you a crap ton of heat when you do them. His heavy attack on a downed enemy is so slow, I think half the time, or at least over half the time I try and do it, they just roll out of the way. Some of those aforementioned upgrades I mentioned are among the more expensive, which isn't that bad thanks to 4's unique upgrade system, but it still means that technically he has to be upgraded before he becomes really fun. And even upgraded as far as he will go, his combo speed is just a bit too slow for me to be that enjoyable. Playing as Tanimura is definitely an experience, and above all else, I'm glad he's here so we can compare, contrast, and improve in the future with the mechanics he introduces. A shame, I guess, that he has to rank this low. Though his theme music is absolutely bangin', I will say that. I realized something as I was making this list. The most unsatisfying thing I could do is not rank a fan favorite style low or rank a generally maligned style high. No, the most unsatisfying thing I could do is this. Out of 44 entries, have a fucking tie. Between Zero and Kiwami, 3 of Kiryu's styles saw a non-insignificant change to their utility. Rush improved significantly due to not needing the heat system to be usable, as did Dragon for similar reasons, even if it did suffer some unforeseen drawbacks. Brawler wasn't strictly affected by heat, so it wound up feeling a bit like a downgrade due to the availability of the rest of your toolkit. Then there's Beast. I shit you not, I cannot for the life of me figure out if there's a difference at all between Zero and Kiwami's Beast. It's tough to tell if the combo speed is an improvement because speed is the one main thing that holds Beast back in both games, being arguably one of, if not the slowest style in the series. But again, calling that a downside is like calling the friggin' sky blue. It's designed around being slow by compensating with supposedly massive damage and great crowd clearing potential, and I'll say this, it can consistently do one of those two things. All I'm saying is, there's a good reason most fights in Zero start with the recce of the battlefield to spot bikes. Thing is, it fills the exact same niche in both games and to basically the exact same degree of effectiveness. While it's great at clearing out crowds of enemies, it undeniably struggles to deal with bosses or tougher enemies considering how fast many of them move. The two exceptions to this are Shibusawa's second phase, which is intentionally designed to be fought using Beast, and Charging Bear Hug being an essential move for grinding Shakedown on Kiryu. So great crowd control, poor single target control, and Congress-level slow attack speed. Problem: they worked the exact same. Choosing one over the other is a Herculean task, pun entirely intended. Zero's is subject to more BS through Ms. Tatsu's training, being some of the grindiest in the game, having 15 separate missions to go through, 10 of which are annoying as sin, and still being victim to the heat system, but it's not necessary to do them, and it's also just more universally applicable than it is in Kiwami, due purely to the amount of shit that they throw onto the streets in this game. Kiwami's Beast is more balanced, being a bit more on par with Kiryu's other styles, but being honest, I don't think the enjoyment anyone got out of Beast in the previous game was its balance. Zero's has its own upgrade tree that you can specialize in, Kiwami has Time for Destruction and the Max Head Crush heat action glitch. Ultimately, I gave it to Kiwami because of its superior stylistic synergy. And by that, I mean, I remembered Time for Destruction exists and realized, oh yeah, Zero doesn't have that. If only there was a way to make Beast even better, and in the Dragon Engine, and playable on Masaharu Kaito. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's move on. I call Dragon and Zero the grindiest style in the series, but solely based on your preference in minigames. This is what I meant by that. Remember all that kicking and screaming I did when it came to Kiwami 2's version of Mad Dog, and how one of my big complaints was the amount that it stripped from this version? Yeah, that's because the things it removed essentially made this style fun, which is what we get in this game. After spending hours grinding out the cabaret side story, your reward is the honestly solid, classic Mad Dog style. And don't even get me started on why this contextually doesn't make any sense. It is funny though, so it gets a pass in that regard. I mean, the power of friendship, cabaret, and this knife I found, how can that be bad? In terms of how it plays, your rush combo looks a bit unorthodox, but that's because all the ending hits are meant to combo into Savage State, when you run around the field like a madman. Honestly, even though it's a gimmick, I think it's kind of awesome, and I'm surprised that Pirate Yakuza didn't bring this back. However, your standard combos don't end there, because you can chain those attacks into chomps, where you brutally lunge forward with the knife, getting heat back on hit, which lets you continue the savagery. It'd arguably be the best snowball style in the series, and it does do that to an amazing degree of effectiveness, but it's once again subject to Yakuza 0's unfortunate combat balancing. So, I must say it again for the people in the back, Demon Fire Counter! AKA the strongest single target move in the entire game. Unless you go out of your way to get a better knife and invest in gear and or solid skills that make other knives better, your damage in this style is honestly not great. This changes with that blasted counter, which, while I do love it and it makes shakedown cheese easy as pie, I can't deny it's once again another case of one tool being superior to all the rest. Basically, take what I said about Dragon and Kiwami 1, but it's actually fun to play the game normally, even if it's not optimal. The difference being that Kiwami Dragon starts out horrible and you upgrade it to make it fun, whereas with this one, you don't get to upgrade it. I still don't know why the legend styles in this game go sauceless when it comes to unique purchasable upgrades, but it is what it is. On top of that, there's Frenzy, otherwise known as the Tornado, which actually just sucks in this game due to draining almost all of your heat and deals negligible damage. That being said, it does place higher than other similarly poorly balanced styles, because 1, it's actually fun to go about using this style even without abuse of its best move. And 2, there's a couple unique evasive moves that make it stand out, namely Shadow Trail. Remember how I said this series has a really consistent level of quality when it comes to the combat? Yeah, let the style be evidence of that. Mad Dog and Zero, though balanced somewhat poorly, is still really fun, and a welcome addition to Majima's moveset. Do you enjoy white bread? If the answer to the previous question was no, then you're not gonna like this segment. Brawler in Kiwami isn't really a downgrade compared to his Zero counterpart. Okay, there is one area I can think of where it's objectively slightly worse, but let's backpocket that for now. My point is, it's lower than the original solely because of how much the rest of your move list opens up thanks to the abolishment of the heat gears. I'm like 60% sure the two words heat and gears next to each other are the most often typed in this script, but I digress. We'll get to it eventually, but because Kiryu is generally more versatile in this game than he is in Zero, it turns his most consistent option in Zero into another decently consistent tool in his arsenal. There's a reason this style places basically in the middle of good on this list, because that's exactly what it is in this game. It is good. Also, you may have picked up on the fact that I'm not saying much about Brawlers specifically, and that's because I'm saving that discussion for the Zero segment. Let's instead discuss the differences, good and bad, between this, Zero, and other comparable skills in Kiwami. Firstly, your double finishers now actually drain heat, where you just needed to have heat last time, making it a bit less of a reliable skill even if it is easier to get due to not needing to be in the third gear. Secondly, and maybe this is a bit situational but it's still a downgrade, Counterhook has been replaced with the slightly underwhelming Lightning Fist, which, while more balanced, lacks the impact of the previous counter. Those are the downsides solely compared to its iteration in Zero. Comparing it to similar abilities in this game, it I don't know, it still doesn't fare too well. Its unique heat draining ability, time for resolve, isn't really that applicable. The only situation I could see this being used in is the Jingu fight, maybe, but nowhere else. Compared to Beast's time for destruction, which can triple your damage output, or rushes, which we'll get to, this ability doesn't really stack up. Though it is better than Dragon's time for Yinglong, which is functionally useless. Comparable to other skills, Brawler seems like it doesn't stack up, but keep in mind that it has exactly what Zero's iteration has going for it. It is a solid, consistent style. And while I'll go more in depth with this later, Resolute Counter as its basic mechanic is shockingly helpful, well balanced, and scales really well into the later levels. Overall, I'll probably get shanked for saying I like this over Dragon in this game, but it is what it is. This is the second time I've had to record this. This is not in the script, so just apologies if I sound a little less enthused about this one. We've reached the top of B tier, the best of the pretty good. And similar to Beast, we're once again looking at a style centered around being kinda slow, but with the ability to cause some real mayhem. The difference being, it's in Yakuza 4's god tier combat engine. Zero's style balancing, at least in terms of Kiryu, works on a strength versus dexterity scale. Before we had that though, Yakuza 4 gave us entire-ass characters that worked on that plane, and on the far side of strength we had one Taiga Saejima. I feel like looking at him in direct comparison to the other playable characters in this game should give you a pretty good idea of how he works. He's a large, hulking man with massive charge attacks, being the first character in the series to properly have them. While it'd be easy to compare this to his playable appearance in 5, the difference is significantly greater than something like Zero to Kiwami, so I'll say this. Despite being the slow tank archetype of this game, I'd argue he controls the second most unorthodox next to Tanimura. This is mainly due to him only having a 3-hit light combo, his finishers having to be charged before they can reach their full potential, and the triple finisher being locked to the final hit of the rush combo, which I find really weird for some reason. What makes him enjoyable to play in this game, though, is all the unique charges and attacks he gets, even if not all of them wind up on the same playing field. While in heat, the Man Mountain becomes basically impossible to knock down, and with high tier upgrades he struggles to even flinch, tempered by the fact that he gets like 2 heat bars, alright? Though I do think it's a bit weird he doesn't have finishing holds, he does get a couple unique grab-based attacks like the tackle, the down grab, and of course, the knee. Half of your body upgrades extend to this as well, considering the amount of stuff that just makes escaping from the enemy grasp easier. There's also his charged uppercut, which can kill at high health, making it once again a tool that trumps most of his others. To be honest, there's not really much to comment on when it comes to Saejima in this game. He's big, he's kinda slow, he's quite strong, he's pretty rigid, and overall is definitely one of the most good characters in the series. Even if 5 did make him like 1,000 times better, but we'll get there. On to the A tier. Don't do the math on this because it will reveal how many entries we have left, but the following 11 styles all fall into A tier, which I've officially labeled as the Great tier. All of these styles I've definitively enjoyed using, and they'll either find consistent use in my arsenal of styles, or I just like how an individual game plays. Bottoming out this segment, we've got what I'd consider to be the best single-style, single-character combat in the series. And hey, good news, the upgrade system from 6 isn't any better. Quite the facelift from last time, though. Kiwami 2 Kiryu is a style that I think is both incredibly easy and surprisingly difficult to talk about. He's easy to talk about because of the amount of tools at your disposal and upgrades to get, making him an overall shockingly versatile army of one. However, he's also tough to talk about because other than his capacity to deal with most combat situations, he's just kind of stale. You've got charged attacks and finishers that you can upgrade and unlock more of that you can combo with that aren't super useful, especially considering how much better finishing holds in this feels compared to 6. Extreme Heat is pretty well balanced in this to the point where I think it really becomes what they were trying to make it, that being a costly but worthwhile power-up. And generally speaking, a lot of your classic moves like Regard and Double Quickstep are unlocked naturally as part of getting further into the game, even if the distance on your Quickstep in early Dragon Engine games makes me want to tear my brain out and yell at it. However, there's always a however, it still has to be leveled up in the horrible early Dragon Engine upgrade economy. I've got an entire video on my channel dedicated to me and my friends going insane and just doing impressions of Family Guy characters while grinding out XP in this game, if you need concrete proof. Yes, the upgrades and general flow of combat are well balanced in a vacuum, with each one giving you a reasonable boost in some form or another. The problem is, again, the XP you get naturally doesn't let you experiment or branch out into anything particularly interesting, making the grind a practical necessity. Also, not marking the acupuncture clinic down on the map is frankly stupid, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. This is the weird thing about Kiryu in this game. Overall, I'd say he's solid, if not a bit floaty and occasionally awkward, but the mechanics surrounding and influencing the progression of combat make me not want to put it any higher than this. Still, I'll take this over Majima. It's clearly been too long since we've had a style that focuses on power rather than speed. Key difference though, this one's got a sword. It's like Mad Dog style again, but the two big differences being that the knife is bigger and this controls nothing like Mad Dog. What winds up being probably one of the most consistent styles in the series, Swordsman does exactly what it says on the tin. You are a man with a sword. Though your attacks are kinda slow, they easily deal the most damage when taken in a vacuum, and are able to be enhanced twice over thanks to Rush Combo Tempest, which is an early game skill that lets you expend a bit of heat during a finishing blow for, to be honest, an unnoticeable difference. You've got some interesting, though sometimes reused heat actions that you can get from Ginryu training, namely the famous essence of silicon lead being the second best way to deal with gun enemies, outside of, shooting them yourself. Handy combo abilities like Rustling Leaves and Fair Weather, and what might be the best counter in the entire game in the form of Lightning's Glory, which can consistently hit multiple enemies at once and deals massive damage. On paper, this all sounds like a lot of fun, and this aforementioned stuff definitely is, but there's also the matter of the context in which a lot of these skills are used. These are almost all reversal skills, meaning you have to wait on back foot for the enemy to do something before Swordsman reaches full potential. That's not an automatic downside, obviously. After all, most of the time when players get counters in these games, they just end up playing like a turtle anyway. I'm players. But because Ishin's combat is so sword-centric, it means unless you play in this turtling playstyle, your basic attacks are subject to getting blocked constantly. There's a couple dedicated Odachi-focused skills in the skill tree, which, okay, to be honest, I never found myself wanting to use the supplementary equipable brawler weapons over my more consistent, quicker, and more easily swappable styles. Speaking of brawler though, I had mentioned in its segment Dragon Wing Sortie being an underwhelming move. Swordsman's equivalent ability, Dragon Fang Flash, is certainly better, but is still subject to the aforementioned blocking. I'm gonna warn you guys right now, the only version of this ability that I actively used in my playthrough was Wild Dancers, but we'll get there. And lastly, you may be tempted to mention Summer Rainfall as a way to break guards, but it suffers a similar problem to Rush's Kick from Zero. It can break guards, but it's tough to combo out of it into a standard attack. Still, if you end up playing to Swordsman's strengths, you'll find a very enjoyable, albeit kinda slow style. If only I could use a gun while playing this. Back to where it all began. Most people starting to get into the franchise these days will start out with Zero, meaning that Brawler will be their first exposure to the series' combat. And I'll say, though it may sound antithetical to its placement, I think this is an ideal starting point. Brawler is one of the most generalist styles in the series, being able to handle most situations in the game. You do solid single target damage and your attacks swing just wide enough to the point they frequently catch other enemies in the crossfire, making it okay at crowd clearing as well. Evidently it's not as good as Beast in that regard, but considering Beast is designed for that and Brawler can do it to an approaching degree of effectiveness, it's hard to deny its potential. Your combo speed thankfully isn't neutered by the heat gear system, meaning somehow this kinda surpasses Rush in terms of being ideal for speedy takedowns. And this is all without mentioning its unique mechanic of Resolute Counter, where non-knockdown attacks against you can be reversed for poor damage but decent combo and stun potential. It's a phenomenal mechanic for when you're just getting started out because it can weirdly reward button mashing, which is fun, damn it. You may have to get hit first, but it's more so treated as a comeback mechanic anyway, making it a handy tool to have. It's basic, but, it works. Unfortunately, this does kind of play into the downsides with this style. It starts out kind of basic, and it doesn't really evolve from there as you're given all the tools you'll need at the start. even if it'd be stupid to not upgrade it at all. Though your combo speed is pretty good, you've only got one dodge, which does make getting out of the way of enemy attacks a gamble. You've got access to some really handy heat actions, especially steadfast counter and finishing blows, but even though you're not too affected by the gears, it's still ideal to bait out using heat actions in favor of combo speed. On top of that, there's also some abilities like Reguard and Face Twisting that are either locked to the higher heat gears or become unavailable the higher the gears get. I get it, you want to maintain a certain gear to maintain certain abilities, but Kiryu's combat in this game unfortunately doesn't complement this system. Also, and maybe this is just a personal thing, but pre-Dragon Engine, I almost never made use of abilities and skills that require you to be drunk because of how out of the way hitting up bars can be. And once you are drunk, it feels weirdly cumbersome staying that way. What keeps Brawler in my good graces, at least relative to this game, is the double finishers not draining heat. Thank God for that. The Bacchus training being probably my favorite of Kiryu's styles, just needing to beat up guys in order to gain new abilities, and the bloody counter hook being a counter that doesn't just outright replace my want to use anything else. Point being, if you go to the dictionary and you look up the word solid, you'll find this style. How in the hell am I only halfway? You know how I kept complaining about how Kiryu is constantly dragged down by the heat gears? Yeah, this just straight up isn't an issue for Majima because his combo speed is always good enough, regardless of the gear level. The significant difference between the two characters being that because Majima's speed isn't affected too much by the level of the gears, you end up paying more attention to what abilities you can and can't use depending on your level of said gear. This all to say, I think Thug takes advantage of this the least, but it's still a hell of a lot of fun to use. We've reached that point in the video because, yes, I genuinely think over half the styles in this series are really fun, and this list is exponential. That all said, Thug, am I right? My thoughts on this style are on the opposite end of what I said about Brawler, insofar that I don't think its fundamentals are particularly strong, but the amount of shit you can theoretically get done with this style is ludicrous. Consider the pure amount of heat actions or moves that revolve around disarming an enemy or using their own weapon to attack them, like the actually busted weapon and gun grab heat actions. You're incredibly evasive with multiple fast lunging dodges, and to that end there's a ton of skills that make use of your positioning relative to the enemy, like the classic chokeout heat action, making this feel like one of the most technical styles in the series, almost like Proto-Snake from Lost Judgment. Hell, some of the high-tier upgrades have Snake Venom in their names and behave similar to Snake's skills. The rub comes in the form of antithetical to Brawler, your basic fundamentals, and being outclassed by Majima's other base styles. Your damage late game is definitely solid, but due to 1. Needing very expensive upgrades in the form of combo boosts, and 2. A couple of the Thug Mastery, Essence, or Night Lord skills feeling like things you should realistically be able to get sooner, it kinda starts in an awkward position. It's also susceptible to the occasionally poor or underwhelming ability, namely Insight and, while this is definitely a personal thing, Harsh Lesson. And as for how it's outclassed by Majima's other styles, I'd argue Slugger deals with single targets better, and Breaker deals with groups better even if Thug isn't really built for that at all. Point being, it can sometimes struggle to find its place among his other styles. Oh, and for my money, this is easily the least flashy, which matters to me specifically when it comes to Majima. That being said, when used effectively, Thug can level the playing field and leave enemies in the dust. And hey, for being my least favorite of Majima's base styles in Zero, it ranked pretty damn well, huh? More than halfway through now, and we've officially gotten to it. My personal most mixed opinion of any style in the series. You're gonna get sick of hearing the intro of 4 Unrestful Flowers before this video is over, I can guarantee you that. And I can guarantee you that because I already have. Call this one a guilty pleasure if you want, because I've seen a lot of people stand staunchly on the other end of this style when it comes to liking it. That being said, I still have weirdly mixed feelings on this as a style. Call it unorthodox if you want, you'd perfectly match exactly what this style is. Gunman is ultimately very gimmicky, there's no way around that, but personally, I like the gimmick it presents. It sort of feels like its own little button masher minigame, which is a lot less painful than it might sound on paper. So long as the enemy doesn't have an armor bar, you can shred through guys from a safe distance, even if you're at a pretty low level. It can also stun guys to the ground, leaving them wide open for more shots on, or alternatively you can switch to another style and make use of its superior damage, so long as that style isn't friggin' brawler. That's actually why I think Gunman is as good as it is, and why it ranks this high. For lack of a better term, it's an incredible combo style. Whether it's switching into it to start shredding enemies from a distance, or switching from it to combo into higher damage styles, Gunman really works best in a game with multiple styles because of how well its cross-style snowball potential is. That all being said, it definitely would have ranked higher, probably alongside Wild Dancer even, but oh man is there ever a lot holding it back. First of all, I really despise the enhanced ammo mechanic, considering it's a finite resource that's expensive as hell to replenish and doesn't even add that much to the style overall. This wouldn't be that bad considering you can just not use them, but 5 of the upgrade slots are dedicated solely to learning how to craft these things, making them effectively a waste of a slot in my eyes. Same thing goes for the cannon upgrades for similar reasons to the Odachi upgrades in the Swordsman tree. Its special move, Dragonfire Blaze, just straight up didn't work for me, and it took until the actual post-game before I understood how it even worked in the first place, which is fine because it doesn't really add that much anyway. And despite being a style that works best at a distance, you get not 1 but 2 mediocre counters at close range that you'll both never get to use, and even if you do, they just aren't worth it. But in spite of all that rage, Gunman in general adds a lot to the gameplay loop of Ishin, and I'd hate to see it removed. Go down the Winter Winds pistol path for a higher fire rate, and you'll have a style that can hang with the best of them. I highly value what this style adds to the game, I just hate some of what this style has. You know what? Maybe it would be better with a sword. I don't know. Did you know fundamentally changing your game's mechanics so they don't ruin a potentially interesting style makes that style potentially interesting? Open your eyes, sheeple, this is what learning from your mistakes looks like. With the big mechanic... Okay, the only mechanic holding Rush back in Zero being out of the question, it doesn't automatically mean Russian Kiwami is infinitely better, right? Wrong, because this style is arguably the fastest Kiryu has ever been or will ever be. Helping maintain this is the fact that even before you get quick-step enhancing upgrades like Wind God Mastery, you get 3 pretty good dodges. And sure, they may drain heat after the first like last time, but considering one of the earliest skills you can get in this game is once again Swallow Spirit, which very effectively fills your heat on dodged attacks, it's a mechanic that practically nullifies itself. That's not without mentioning some of the higher tier upgrades that turn your dodges into genuine tools of destruction, like Demonic Shadow and Counter Quickstep that let you give the enemy the slip and start wailing on them from behind with the classic Smoky Beef style backshot routine. Or the Charge Kick to finish your rush combos that can turn a style with somewhat mediocre damage into a killing machine under the right circumstances. Actually, speaking of that, it's worth noting what makes this style land here specifically. Your damage is still kinda mid. Your punches honestly don't do that much, and while this criticism extends to Rush and Zero, it's more prevalent here considering how much fun the rest of your toolkit is to use. Extending off of that, there's also the matter of the extra Rush combo attacks you can unlock, which sounds cool on paper, but the ending lag on most of them leaves you just completely vulnerable. And to add what I guess is an insult to injury, you don't get any double finishers in the style, meaning that similar to Thug, from an outward combat perspective, Rush and Kiwami seems to lack a lot of practical application. However, combining it with stuff like Quick Step Blow, your 10th Rush combo hit stunning the enemy, being able to attack the enemy from behind, not letting them turn around, and especially Time for Godspeed, your damage may not go up, but the opportunity for attack certainly does. To put a bow on it, Rush and Kiwami is sort of the let me cook style, as there's tons of room for rapid-fire player expression over the course of somewhat mediocre damage stats. Seriously though, let me cook. You know, Tiger Drop. What if you didn't have to wait for an enemy to attack before you dealt all that damage? That'd be silly. Thankfully, Judgment gave us that exact thing with Flux Goddamn Fissure. Wow. I genuinely can't tell if Tiger was shown too much love, Crane wasn't shown any at all, or both. It's probably both. Point being, not only is Tiger good in Judgment, it feels like it's balanced around the downsides of the game. Where one of the biggest drawbacks with Crane was the bounce blocking, Tiger has double hitting lights and pierce charge finishers that can very effectively break through guards, making the bounce blocking a practical non-issue. Helping Tiger get through this game is its high damage, quick speed, the balance, elegance, and ferocity of the Tiger skills that just enhance your capabilities and overall agility, and Okay, let's rip this band-aid off. Flux Fissure, next to skills like Evasion Strike in Yakuza 6, Demon Fire from Zero, and Tiger Drop from most of the games, but particularly Kiwami, is easily one of the most broken skills in the entire series. And that's before you get Resonance, Amplitude, and Unleash that make it both easier to do and more effective at killing guys. And I have weirdly mixed feelings about it, because while it does fall into the camp of overpowered moves that can tarnish the rest of your kit, it can be blocked against, and there is a small, albeit still present, learning curve. Ultimately, though Tiger is generally incredibly useful, there's a couple things that hold it back. First of all, you're still playing Judgment. RGG still hadn't quite figured out how to make the combat and physics in the Dragon Engine as satisfying as it would go on to be in this game's sequel and every game thereon, so it still feels somewhat floaty, but not in the way Crane does it, where you feel like you're hovering above all. Second, and more importantly to me, I didn't like the precedent that this style set. Because remember, you have multiple styles in this game, but because of the way it's balanced, you have one that has a couple niche tools and one that takes up the rest of the game. It didn't feel like styles, it felt like, as I've described it earlier, Tiger plus one. Still, I'd rather an effective and overall enjoyable style in a vacuum than something that doesn't get any love at all. This game needs a sequel, and fast. I made this list, so take it from me that this means something. I did not see this one coming. Slugger this high? Really? I mean, I knew I liked it, but it's not that good, right? No, it's somehow actually that good. Being yellow, similar to Kiryu's Beast style, you'd think this would be Majima's slow but strong style, and you'd sort of be right. This style does indeed deal massive damage, but they forgot the slow part, so you're instead just a terrifying hitbox of killing proportions, the likes of which Majima's never seen. Being locked to a bat means that this style actually excels at not only using strong one-handed weapons, but most every other weapon type as well. That's genuinely its main gimmick. You become a slightly worse Shinada. A majority of your skills in this style are dedicated to learning how to use weapons, or the durability of your weapons not decreasing while in calm state, meaning that no matter what you're using in this style, you're a force to be reckoned with. Helping with this are some very iconic moves like the Bat Nunchuck attack that can really do some damage, as well as being able to stun enemies like your back and rush style. While your heat actions in this game are pretty unanimously very strong, sluggers in particular just have a sense of destructiveness. Like that standard one where you home run a guy's skull into next week? Priceless. And yeah, a natural guard against blades and most other weapon types is a welcome plus from me. This style is overall a phenomenal damage dealer with a speed penalty that doesn't really affect it. The catch? Bonking. Unless you have the follow-through ability and are in third gear, you'll find yourself succumbing to this style's main, or what is essentially its only drawback. Hitting a wall, pole, or really any static environmental object, hell, sometimes a curb if you're unlucky, will cause Majima to reel, leaving him wide open to attack, which can get pretty annoying pretty quickly. And just like the previous styles, it's got the occasional dud move, like its counters, which I never used, or the fact that it's only got 2 unique heat actions, not including those with different weapon types. That's just the thing, and the thing you're probably going to see a lot of going forward. With one major exception, this style doesn't really have many drawbacks. I mean, I guess some pretty bog standard moves like Tortoise Spirit are level locked, but considering how easy blocking is with this style, especially with the old directional block you can get, it makes sense you'd have to wait for it. The trainer missions are kind of boring, I guess. My point is, this style is really fun, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of that from here on out. Buckle the fuckle in, folks! I still don't like Hailstorm. Damn, looking good without all that hair. Putting aside my personal bias that this game is the best thing since both sliced and canned bread, can we agree that this game's combat is balls to the walls insane in the most enjoyable way possible? No better do I think this is exemplified, actually, than with the final form of the large coat man himself, Saejima. They added one mechanic that transforms him from a slow yet high damage beast into, spoilers I guess, what is probably the most destructive style in the entire series. 2 words. Tiger puppetry. If an enemy is launched into the air and you've got heat, or hell, if they're just on the ground, grab them by the legs and swing them around like they're a goddamn ragdoll. This deals solid damage to nearby enemies as well as the poor sap you've got a hold of. Who needs weapons when you've got enemies like these? On top of this, there's Tendo, Saijima's trainer, who gives him some of the most busted abilities in the series in the form of Herculean Spirit, which makes you immune to flinching in heat, Tiger Iron Hammer, letting him use some of the most powerful environmental weapons in the game, and Tiger Dragon Drop, a counter that's okay on power and broken in utility, being able to consistently stun anyone getting hit by it. This isn't a metric that I use to judge many of the other characters, but Saijima's Amon fight in 5 against Jiro, that is to say his super boss, is probably the easiest in the series with his counter and overall plethora of abilities. His drawbacks are minimal, but they're definitely apparent. First, and most importantly, he has easily the fewest heat bars of any character or style in the series, making a lot of his heat-based moves kind of fleeting. Some of the moves I praised him for last time become more situational or generally worse with his improved kit, not really compensating, namely Tiger Charge and Fangs. And again, while this isn't something I brought up too much with the other characters, you're going to be hearing the same voice lines over and over in this style, considering Tiger Puppetry has like 2, maybe 3 voice lines it likes to use. These downsides aside, there's no denying that Saijima in 5 is a destructive beast and one hell of a good time. If you don't believe me, Tiger Essence of Shockwave. Just as a move. Look, I get it. All of these styles, all of these gimmicks, all this weird stuff that makes the style viable with some weird trade-off, right? Maybe, just maybe, you're in the mood to just hit some shit. Well, here you go. The naming convention still makes no sense to me on this one, but I'll bury that grudge for now. Made for all the people who thought Lost Judgment was too technical and complicated in its design, Yakuza style embodies the John Mulaney quote of, "The goal is to hit some shit." So why hit some shit? It may sound like I'm harping on the simplicity of this kit, but that's because that's honestly what makes it work so well. In stark contrast to the sluggish, cumbersome, and gimmicky style that is Agent, Yakuza's moves are ludicrously simple, but I mean that in a good way. Unless you count being able to charge your finishers, this style doesn't have a gimmick. You're very strong, a little slow, decently evasive, and yeah, that's really about it. You can combo out of your charge finishers with style hot swapping like in the previous game, double ultimate counter is a fun take on mortal reversals, and I don't really know what to say about Yakuza and Gaiden. It's about as straightforward a style as you can get. Your enemies are cheese, you are cheese grater. Do the math on how encounters are going to go. The biggest downside with this style is being in a game as long, or as short, as Gaiden is. Not counting shared abilities, similar to Crane and Judgment, and not looking at heat actions, Yakuza gets 12 unique style upgrades, which is shockingly low, especially considering some of the things omitted from this style. No re-guard, only 2 dodges, and one of Kiryu's classic Dragon Engine moves, the finishing hold, is extreme heat locked, meaning it seems from the outside looking in like this game is once again a nothing sandwich. However, that's what your incredibly powerful normals are for. Great at dealing with single targets, better at dealing with groups than Agent is, even if it kind of falls into a similar camp as Tiger from Judgment, where I don't like the precedent it sets with one style being strictly better than the other. Yakuza's style just works. And it does it really goddamn well. If I'm ever in the mood to just punch some guys and I don't feel like going to jail, I'll boot this game up, charge my finishers, and be home in time for dinner. And now we've reached the end of A tier, closing out the greatest of the greats. And, just like Slugger style before it, I had to ask myself multiple times, is this style really that good? And I determined, kinda, but it's not about its overall power. It's about sending a message. Over the past couple entries, namely Yakuza and Tiger, I've mentioned I don't really like the precedent they set for being just objectively stronger versions of other styles in their respective games. I mention that here because Kiryu in 4, despite being one style, is the exact opposite. His damage, speed, and versatility are all just pretty good, but to me, that's what makes him so good. Kiryu in this game is arguably the most balanced character in the entire series. This style is the ultimate jack-of-all-trades, master of none. He can do basically everything to a great degree of effectiveness, excelling calling it nothing in particular except for being a generalist's dream. Helping this is, I assume, because he's the last character you unlock in Yakuza 4, you actually start out with a lot of really useful skills, namely everything in the body tree, and some skills that would have been perfectly fine if you had to upgrade in order to get them, namely Daruma Tumbler, cat-like reflexes, and higher combo speed. While it may sound antithetical to his placement, I don't think there's anything wrong with Kiryu in this game, but that's also what ends up being his biggest drawback. He may be a jack of all trades, but he's subsequently also a master of none. Yes, I'd rather this than something that excels in one situation and no other, as evidenced by what he's placed above, but it also means Kiryu kinda lacks much of an identity in this game. It's basically him from Yakuza 3 again if he was generally more applicable, enemies blocked less, he did overall more standard and heat action damage, and you started in an already advantageous state. And yeah, like I said with Kiryu in 3, I understand what they were going for even if they missed the mark, and this is it. This right here, what you're seeing on your screen, this is the mark. The problem being, he's in contention with the human tiger, the parasitic turtle bastard, and I guess we'll get to the other one. Point being, in this quite revolutionary game for Yakuza's mechanics, it's tough to call Kiryu, who's overall one of the most balanced and, for lack of a better word, fair characters in this series, anything more than the greatest of the great, and not much more. He just barely edges out of S tier, because if he had more of an identity in this game, I swear he'd be among the best of the best. Though I guess his identity is that of a generalist playstyle, which is what gets him this high in the first place. Speaking of S tier, yeah, let's do this. This is the largest tier in this video, consisting of 14 styles to go over. All of these are, in my opinion, amazing. I'll sometimes even go back to the games they're in just so I can play as these again. So starting us off here, we've got the only character whose jump from 4 to 5 saw a downgrade, and just like in my Yakuza battle theme ranking, I can't believe it took us this long to talk about Akiyama. I tell you, inverse to Slugger and Kiryu from 4, I'm honestly surprised Akiyama in 5 isn't higher on the list. In my very first initial drafts, like before I had deliberated over and over about placements, Akiyama in Yakuza 5 was number 2. We'll get to why he moved down, but as for why he managed to get this high in the first place, it's Akiyama. While he may not be the strongest guy, he's easily among the most evasive and fast characters or styles in the entire series, and you can see a lot of that in 5 especially. His slash kicks got extended from 4, he's still got a plethora of taunts that raise your heat, but the biggest change to his moveset comes in the form of his unique heat ability, Launch Strike, where if you've got heat, certain moves launch enemies into the air, at which point you can combo them there. Even if you don't combo out of launching them, the alpha, beta, gamma, and final drive heat actions make it a unique state to play with. This was initially what made him place so high for me, because I love the ever-loving shit out of this mechanic. Even after having been moved down substantially, this prototype for stuff like juggling in the later games and Pirate Yakuza's air combos is easily one of my favorite gimmicks to ever grace the series, and I desperately hope if we ever get an Akiyama Gaiden, we see this move return. Compared to the previous game, you're overall still a slippery little phoenix with talons that hit like trucks under the right circumstances. But the problems arise when you realize what they took from us. Akiyama in 4, you'll notice that we haven't talked about him yet, but we'll get there. Because they removed wall bounding in Yakuza 5, and because they nerfed his quick step shoulder bash and stationary triple kick, it ultimately feels a bit like they sacrificed unique player expression in favor of unique, grounded mechanics over which they have control. Saigo's war training still fucking sucks, and his wall heat action takes like 2 to 3 business minutes to fully conclude. Okay, those last two are more so problems with Akiyama solely in this game, not in direct comparison to his 4 iteration, but you know, there's still problems. If his infinites were more powerful and extended beyond just doing the launch strike on a grounded enemy over and over, and if wall bounding was a thing in this game, on top of the gimmicks he's currently got, he'd go straight to the top, no questions asked. As for now, we're left with a slightly more rigid but still stylish and fun as hell loan shark that I'll happily come back to anytime. I said earlier in the video that style only trumps quality when the quality is high enough. If you want strict proof of this, look no further than the flashiest style this side of the Edo period. I get not liking Isshin Kiwami, but you are kidding yourself if you think Wild Dancer is anything less than deserving of a spot in S tier. On the subject of phoenixes, remember how I said I wish swordsmen had a gun or how gunmen could use a sword? Sometimes miracles happen, folks. Your sword swings wide enough to hit multiple enemies and fast enough to keep them stunned for extended combos. These light combos go for 5 hits, and you naturally start with triple finishers if you extend your combo into Phoenix Frenzy, which, trust me, you'll want to do because the 3rd hit of Phoenix Frenzy turns you into a pistol Beyblade, hitting enemies at all distances. On top of that, and you're free to disagree with me on this, but Wild Dancer has the best heat actions in this game, and arguably some of the coolest in the series. Special shoutouts to my homies Majestic Dispersal, the Dance of Mourning, and especially the Bloody Wheel. All of which maximize style and utility by dealing a crap ton of damage to single and multiple targets. Because this style is so universally applicable, its endgame is arguably so much more fun than the other styles because of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd step upgrades that let your combos just keep going and going and going, increasing in damage the longer they go on. And a parry as well? They can do mid-combo? I feel genuinely spoiled! Of course, it should be obvious from the outside looking in at this game's styles, but evidently your standard attacks aren't quite as powerful as those in Swordsman or Gunman respectively. You also don't have a natural block because it's instead replaced with the parry, and the timing therein can be a bit strict, but to be honest, I didn't mind it because it kept me on my toes considering how easy it is to dodge cancel out of your combos in this style. Your combos can get a bit stale looking after a while of doing the same one over and over for the maximum degree of effectiveness. Its unique skill, Dragon God Dance, while still my most used compared to the others, I didn't really rely on too often. Luxury and Splendor is a heat action that, to be honest, it's just too expensive for not enough reward. And a good bit of those aforementioned moves and heat actions that I love are locked until the style's been upgraded a bit. But considering how much fun this style is to use, I found I got more skill orbs for this style faster than any other, and I was naturally throwing my training orbs in there for more abilities. Honestly, most of these downsides kind of feel like I'm grasping at straws. Wild Dancer is just genuinely incredibly fun to use. Stylish as hell and effective to boot. There's no other way I'd love to explore the world of Isshin than with a sword and gun in hand. Provided, of course, I'm wielding both at the same time. A question I doubt many people had coming into this video was, what version of Kiryu ranks the highest? And I'll warn you now, the main character of the entire series didn't even manage to crack the top 10. Where Saejima in this game winds up being the most destructive style in the series, Kiryu in 5 is what I can only describe as being the angriest style. Dude is pissed, and you can actively feel it through his gameplay, being that he starts with max combo speed and incredibly solid damage, and he just gets more utility from there. Before I mention his unique upgrades and stuff, we first gotta talk about it. You know it, you probably love it. I'm of course talking about Dragon Spirit. While it's labeled as an ability similar to Tiger Puppetry or Launch Strike, it really isn't. If you've got heat and you press the right trigger, Kiryu becomes invincible and deals crazy-ass damage for a few seconds. I could end it right there, but alas, there's more. Not only are double finishers one of the first skills you unlock, one of Kiryu's most situational tools in previous entries, Bounding Throw, is actually busted as shit now. Not only is it really good considering how often enemies like to swarm you, not only does the move not drain heat, but it actually generates heat now, meaning under the right circumstances, you can infinite with this move. These two moves alone ensure that Kiryu in 5 is, without a doubt, one of the most broken and unbalanced characters in the entire series, and I am here for it all the way. And this is on top of being surprisingly evasive with moves like Cat Feet and Evasive Quickstep, his heat actions being fucking brutal in this, namely the meme that is Essence of Face Grading, and not that this impacts much, but his fit goes hard! Okay, well, I guess the brokenness can get a bit tiring after a while. Consider the fact that you can not only get Tiger Drops super fast, but you can also get an ability with equal difficulty to that widens the timing of it, making what's normally one of the most broken moves in the series even better, basically off the rip. Stronger enemies will often block your Dragon Spirit attacks, meaning you have to grab them, which drains all your heat pretty quickly. His trainer, Sosuke Komaki, is fine, I guess, but he really only teaches you moves you could unlock with enough time in the previous game. And compared to the other characters, his climax heat actions just kinda lack much of an impact, especially the one that you start with. And Is that it? Seriously, I'm struggling to think of something else to talk about here. The first drawback I mentioned is kind of a biggie later in the game, because as much fun as a power trip is, it's nice to be tempered by something, but honestly I don't know what else to say. If you're in the mood for killing things fast, brutally, and with great speed, well, there are other theoretical styles you can do that with, as you'll see, but if you want to do all that stuff as Kiryu, look no further than my GOAT, Yakuza 5. Remember Beast from Zero and Kiwami? Yeah, take that, put it into the Dragon Engine, make it fast. You know what you get? This section will probably be shorter due to this style being both a rehash of Beast and the fact that it's a very short DLC, but I'll try my best to explain why it's so much higher. First, and most importantly, juggling. While this isn't the first game in the series to have juggling, it is the first to make it easily accessible, meaning keeping your enemies in the air with Tank's already high-powered attacks is both satisfying and surprisingly useful. Secondly, this game introduced the secret/hidden arts mechanic, giving you a buff by facilitating pretty easy actions. In Tank's case, you get a defense buff every time you land a perfect iron guard, which can prove quite handy. What makes Tank in particular so much better than Beast is not only are you just generally much faster, you get a ton of non-heat consuming moves that truly fulfill the Beast vision. You've got stuff like Human Helicopter, which is surprisingly good at dealing with single targets, which is something that I think Beast struggled with. There's Deadly Dance, which somehow gives you more damage with weapons by understanding how to better use them. EX Unyielding Counter is a surprisingly hard-hitting move out of Iron Guard. Cross Strike, which launches enemies pretty consistently, setting them up for aerial combos, and Heroic Devotion, which does exactly what it says it does. The drawbacks in this style are mainly in relation to Bruiser, similar to how Brawler in Kiwami is worse only in direct comparison to Rush in the same game. You have one less hit in your Rush combo, your attack speed is generally a bit lower, some of your better moves do require you to get hit first, which can be bypassed a little bit thanks to Perfect Iron Guard, and overall it's just not quite as versatile as its stylistic counterpart. But with taunts as flashy and surprisingly useful as these, with an ass this fat that don't quit, and with damage this glaringly destructive, it's not hard to call Tank anything less than a style that describes itself perfectly. While it may not be as destructive as Saejima in 5, I'd wager it certainly does the job of a large hulking man doing large hulking things to a greater degree of effectiveness. I mean, Saejima didn't have taunts like these now, did he? Well, that didn't take long. We finally hit the top 10, and shit has finally started to hit the fan. Remember Brawler from Zero and Kiwami as well? Yeah, take that, put it into the Dragon Engine, and make it more versatile. What do you get? Bruiser is my preferred of these two styles, but a lot of my same praises for Tank apply here. Juggling is evidently still a thing, but thanks to the Goro Gori finisher, you've got a quicker and arguably more consistent way to pop them up for an easy combo. In place of a defense boost on a Perfect Iron Guard, you now get an attack speed boost when you land a repel, aka bitch slapping your opponent's hand away. And no, I'm not the first person to make that joke. Thing is, regardless of the game, regardless of the combat, a combo speed increase is always, no matter what, gonna be an insanely powerful buff. Look at Time for Godspeed in Kiwami, the main downside being, of course, that it drained all of your heat when you used it. Here, the downside is, there isn't one. You just get to be faster off a repel counterattack, which is ludicrously satisfying and doubly useful. While they did take away Resolute Counter, you still get an arguably better version of it through the Hammer of Will, which can again launch enemies. There's also the effective as hell gripping pile driver in place of a standard double finisher. You get 3 dodges, which should be the norm, but I digress. And of course, you get a slightly worse but still incredible counter in the form of both the aforementioned Repel and Bomb Punch, making this once again a generalist's dream. Just like Kiryu in 4, there aren't strictly any downsides to speak of, even if it's not entirely perfect by design. Bomb Punch does make you take damage, and you can't repel enemies with weapons other than knives, but unlike Kiryu in 4, this style has a very distinct identity, a lack of refinement. This style is as close to the embodiment of chaos as you can get, stop looking at me Mad Dog, and I love that. I guess the main drawback for some with these two styles is that in the end, they are just kind of repackaged versions of Brawler and Beast, But because of the changes made to their toolkits, because of their respective unique identities in the form of a lack of refinement and wrestling respectively, and because of how much fun they are to use, they easily get top marks from me. Also, EX Farewell to Arms is both a phenomenal name and is surprisingly useful. Fuck your gun, curse a fist. You knew he was going to be up here. The Phoenix rises again in his most fashionable broken showing yet. Akiyama in 4 is sort of the character that proves that just because you balance a style by making it more powerful yet slower doesn't work, because taken in a vacuum, Akiyama is shockingly weak. However, he compensates for this by having some of the most busted moves in the entire series. Like I said earlier, he gets infinites against walls and curves thanks to the wall bounding, making his kicks feel like goddamn machine gun fire. Your upgrades to evasion and quick step striking make you a threat at practically any distance, letting you close the occasional gap and show the enemies what's good by combining them into another infinite. Your taunts that raise your heat are at their strongest here, because 4's AI is, at least in my opinion, pretty good at keeping their distance. Your heat actions are sick as hell, with special shoutouts going to the incredibly effective Triple Strike, Loin Reaving, and the newly introduced but frequently reused comebacks. You can quick-step out of your combos at any time with the right and fairly cheap upgrades, out of which you get attacks to keep enemies at bay. To put a bow on Akiyama in this game, you're always going to be doing something if you're playing him right. Sure, he may not have as many slash kicks as he does in Yakuza 5, but considering the amount of tools at your disposal and the consistent amount of damage you can get in, the time to kill still goes way down in this game, meaning not having as many rush attacks is barely even a downside. Sure, your attacks won't do much on their own, but let me ask you this. When in this entire game do Akiyama's attacks come alone? Similar to Kiryu in Yakuza 5, but with even less downsides, that is to say practically none at all, Akiyama in this game is just straight up genuinely broken. Ridiculously fast damage and notably high damage as a side effect of that, great crowd control heat actions, and a general ability to deal with them thanks to the amount of attack canceling you gain access to. Who wouldn't want to play as the sexiest man alive when you've got moves like these? I'm not gonna lie, this may be one of my most controversial picks to date, but I need to explain something. This style has arguably the biggest gap between the people who love it and people who hate it. This is the most defining style in the entire series, and it's arguably its biggest case of sink or swim. That being said, call me Michael Goddamn Phelps, because it's Shinada time, baby. I'm willing to bet there's a good number of people who kept waiting, thinking, really? No Shinada yet? And now that I've revealed it cracked the top 10, I know I'm going to get a number of comments saying something to the effect of, how did X rank below Shinada? I've come to realize something about this style. If you start his chapter and you don't think he feels particularly fun to play, no matter what upgrades you get, he's not going to get any better, because his upgrades really just enhance the moveset that he starts with. But if you're like me, and it all just starts to click into place, you're in for a real treat. In replacement of a double finisher, you now get My Explosive Finish, which lets you toss the enemy to the ground, making it so your second hit will always connect regardless of the first one. Speed of Light Catch is a phenomenal way to pierce an enemy's guard mid-rush combo, considering how fast it comes out, even with the earlier upgrade that already lets you pretty consistently pierce an enemy's guard. Snapping Turtle, learned from Ayano Koji, plays into his strengths as a grappler, letting him flow very nicely from attack to grab, back and into some very fruitful heat actions like a Barming and C-Strike. And all of this is without even mentioning his unique mechanic of My Meteor Tackle. Put bluntly, it lets you ram an enemy you've grabbed after a rush combo into other enemies, making Shinada a grappler with solid single target damage and solid group control. And somehow, that's only half the reason I love him. The other big side of his kit, and the bit a majority of his upgrades focus on, is weapons. And good lord, these get nutty. Not only does he get access to an infinite durability iron pipe throughout the story naturally, but his side story, The Cost of a Swing, also gives him access to a ton of similar infinite durability weapons, making a time sink with this guy a worthwhile investment. He also gets by far the most heat actions using weapons of anyone in the game, And I'd wager they're all great, ranging from kinda forgettable at worst to absolutely phenomenal at best, with things like Cyclone Slash, Spear Throwing, Bow Coiling, and Furious Frenzy being standouts. Hell, his 2 unlockable climax heat actions, being Whirlwind and Bashing combo, also use weapons. Because of the unique weapon usage Shinada gets, alongside the amount of upgrades tied to it and the sheer amount of fun you can have even if you don't use them, you essentially get 2 characters for the price of 1 here. If, big if, you like how he plays. That's really the bit where people get iffy. A lot of people don't like how he plays normally, and even with weapons. I get he may be a little awkward to use, but I encourage you, if at first it didn't succeed, try again. I swear when he does click, you'll have some of the most fun you can have in this series. And I can say that because I was once that person. He originally didn't even crack S tier, but the more I played him, the more sauce I uncovered, and the more he just clicked into place, the more I realized he easily stands among the absolute best. Just don't bring him back. I think he's fine as it is where he left off. Can't teach an old dog new tricks, you say? Well, what do you call this, then? Well, I suppose its official name is Sea Dog, but I call it proof of the contrary. Sea Dog is the newest style to be introduced to the series as of making this video, and my, what a look. What started out feeling a bit awkward due to not quite being able to tell when the combos ended, slowly but surely turned into one of the most entertaining and effective styles in the series thanks to the sole amount of unique stuff they crammed into this. Starting with the most unique additions, you've got the 3 sidearms, starting with the cutlasses, the main tool in this style that can be thrown out like boomerangs for insane damage, on top of being able to just use them like normal cutlasses. Next is the pistol, which I feared was going to fall into a similar use case as the Hornet drones in Gaiden, but properly upgraded, it becomes a mass-murdering mayhem machine with just a bit of charge time being its only downside. Lastly is the hook, which serves a surprising amount of utility and is the most practical of the 3 sidearms in the overworld. Though I did kind of find it the most cumbersome of these 3 sidearms to use in actual combat due to the trouble it sometimes has locking onto targets. However, if you get this right, you can chain this thing into a cutlass lunging stab, defeating a group of enemies in a row like you're practically going bowling. In a game with as many group fights as this one, Sea Dog turns from a novel gimmicky style into a central tool in your arsenal, making it essential for those hordes of enemies in the side content or the late game. And this is on top of this game bringing back, sort of, Akiyama's unique ability in 5 where you can launch guys into the air and combo them for further damage. The downsides of this style are definitely there, but like a lot of the styles in this tier, it's so much fun to use that you don't necessarily clock them while playing. Unless you're me, who actively went out of his way to do that with every style in this series, knowing he'd eventually make this video. Like I said, your moves are a bit clunky early game because it can be tough to tell which hit of the rush combo you're on. And you unfortunately only get 2 fairly sluggish dodges, making this style feel like it's a bit on the slower side. But considering your ability to jump dodge, hooking enemies to get out of situations, how fast your time to kill ends up being on most enemies, and the omnidirectional parry/block that gives an attack boost on a perfect guard, the occasional sluggishness is balanced out by being, like I said, insanely fun to use. Though I will say, the Dark Instruments are cool in concept, but end up being sort of outclassed by your other style's abilities with the Madness gauge. The Dark Instruments are really effective once they get started, but I find the startup often causes exactly what you think would happen when you start playing a violin in the middle of a street fight. But damn it, do what you want, because a pirate is free, and you are a pirate! Like I said, a pirate may be free, but no one's broken out of more shackles than Majima. That's right, those mad bastards made Mad Dog mad good. This style really has seen all ends of the spectrum, from okay to abysmal to apparently worse than abysmal in Gaiden, though I didn't play Majima in the Coliseum. And now here we are. With a complete overhaul to the way this style works, Mad Dog has turned into something to truly behold. Not only do you have a standard rush combo, but it's been retooled so your knife is now tied to a heavy rush combo, giving you once again essentially two styles in one. Once again, you've got a massive lunging stab and a tornado spin, but both have been retooled as well as become charged attacks, making them feel not only more powerful, but also end up being straight up stronger moves due to their higher damage and extended duration time in the case of the tornado. On top of this, they've added a charged uppercut that launches enemies into the air for combos, which can be used incredibly easy to cheese bosses. And remember how I said in Akiyama's section that he's proof you can't just lower attack speed and increase damage to call that balancing? Here's another case to add to that pile. Despite clearly being the style marketed as Majima's single target killer, thanks to the unique reworking of his kit, he can still manage himself in most any situation. Helping all this is the perfect quickstep ability, letting you get a speed boost when dodging at the right time, even if they removed secret arts letting you carry this buff from style to style. And this is without mentioning its unique madness ability to summon clones that copy some of your moves, and in group fights they just do their own optimized things against other enemies than the one you may be targeting. My grievances with this style are really just in relation to what they took away from the older variations of Mad Dog. I know Kiwami 2 technically got rid of Savage and Chomp, but I really wish we had some form of running around like a maniac. At least, more so than we already do in this game. Some of the classic Mad Dog moves of yore, namely Demon Fire and Maul, are tweaked to be slightly weaker and more contextually specific respectively, which I guess makes sense, but I found myself not using them nearly as much as I would have hoped going into the game. But those complaints would be significantly more prevalent if this whole style didn't just feel like its own thing, finally turning Mad Dog style in from a one-trick pony into universally applicable maniacal wild child. It took us nearly 10 years since its first iteration, but it finally happened. Mad Dog style is good. Better than good, even. It's enough to make a grown man cry. So this entire video has been entirely my opinion. Just to remind you that in the event that you forgot. However, this next entry relies solely on my perspective, because this style is so much more to me than the sum of its parts. It makes sense that it'd be high to most people, but to me, it's something more. Something beautiful to behold here. I feel like the opinion that Breaker is the best style in Zero is fairly universal, considering how widely people seem to know about this style, even without playing the game. It's like a style unto itself in a way, and it's not hard to see why. It's not just that it's incredibly stylish, I wager it's the flashiest style in the series, period. You don't just incorporate breakdancing into your fighting style, the fighting style just is breakdancing. That's badass. I don't care who you are. It'd be one thing if it stopped there, but no, it's got an incredible amount of utility as well. Normally speed is the biggest problem with Zero's combat, but you're not going to find that as an issue here because its finishing moves aren't affected by this at all, and they're the style's main point of interest. Your damage is also ludicrous, being able to shred through enemies provided you set up well and use the right moves. And let's just be real, the windmill is easily one of the coolest moves just ever. On top of these flashy as hell moves being incredibly powerful, they're incredible heat generators as well, which is good news considering the sheer amount of badass, equally stylish and effective heat actions this style gets. I doubt I'll ever get over Friendly Fire, Coiling Strike, and Blade Biting because they're just so goddamn cool! But all that's subjective stuff, not for why it ranks this high from a personal perspective. To put it bluntly, this style was the one that made me realize how special Yakuza was. I had initially seen it in Maxor's video on the game and thought, that looks interesting, maybe I should try this. After being a little disappointed by Kiryu's combat, not to imply that it's bad, it's just gotta contend with Majima. I got to Majima, and when I finally got my hands on this style, this legendary style and substance running hand in hand, making use of breakdancing like I had never seen, it was the moment where it finally clicked. I love this game. Breaker is the most important style to me in the series, because more than any other style, it was in using this that Yakuza's magic finally made sense. So, to whatever genius came up with this idea over at Sega or RGG Studios, I just want to say thank you. I genuinely think, without this style, I wouldn't be where I am today. That being said, it's at this point that my rankings become completely arbitrary. Ranks number 4 to 1 basically take up the same spot in my eyes, because you really can't have one without the others. I'm still gonna rank all 4 because mama didn't raise no bitch, but consider this segment more of a gun to my head, what's my ranking of these styles, instead of a solid, one of these is strictly better than the others. That being said, number 1 is Yagami from Lost Judgment. If you've played this game before, you know damn well why it has to be this way. Each style's not only designed around hot swapping and making stuff up on the fly, but it actively encourages this through the ingenious hidden and secret arts mechanic. Launch with one style, gain a power boost with another, juggle with another, the world goes round, and it's indescribably satisfying. It is a far cry from previous games where styles would often feel more secular and segmented, like you could theoretically make use of all of them together, but it'd be awkward to make that work effectively. As a wise golden slime named Smokey once said, if you don't play to this game's strengths, you're essentially just playing Judgment with 2 extra styles, which is boring. Lost Judgment's combat is only describable as a playground, having a ton of stat effects that you can inflict and a plethora of heat actions being tied to states like agony, fear, and stun. It's not just that the game rewards you for experimenting, it almost penalizes you for playing lame. So ranking these individually really just comes down to how I think each one feels to independently control. That being said, I guess I've never really been the biggest fan of Aikido. I'll be damned though, Snake's doing a good job of making me like the concept. Snake is, I'd wager, the most unorthodox style in at least this game, but god damn is it ever a good time. Weapon enemies have always kind of been, well, I wouldn't strictly say an issue, but they've definitely been a threat. Lost Judgment's solution to this problem being, what if you could disarm everything and got heat action similar to Swordless Rebirth, but instead of being locked to knives and guns, it worked against basically everything. Snake is perfect when it comes to leveling the field. Scared of getting hit with bleed? Smack the sword out of their hands, no biggie. Large group of enemies and you're about to get hit, swap the snake, hit guard and get a guaranteed parry and possibly super armor. You become a brick wall when the vibes turn green, and it's awesome. And that's on top of the simultaneously hilarious and effective EX surrender mechanic, the agonizing charged attacks you get, and the ridiculously powerful grab attacks. It's only held back by kinda meh standard attack damage, mediocre dodges, a couple tools and upgrades that lack active practical application, and similar to something like Gunman and Ishin, it really works best in a game with multiple styles because of how well it synergizes with your other tools. But then again, that last bit isn't really an issue, considering it once again reinforces this game's theme of constant swapping and playing to each style's strengths. If you just use Snake, you'll have some fun. If you use Snake in combination with everything else and generally use it to keep everyone at bay with agony and fear, you'll find the secret sauce. Seriously though, EX Surrender is amazing. I've never seen a style get both simultaneously worse and more fun at the same time. I guess worse is the wrong word, balanced is more appropriate. At the cost of Flux Fissure no longer being an IK, every other part of Tiger has been smoothed out to turn it into some straight up kung fu mastery. The secret art of damage on charged finishers is probably my second favorite, but is also probably the most useful. Speaking of, Tiger's charged finishers just straight up demolish everybody and everything in this game, regardless of that attack buff. Flashing Palm being able to pierce an enemy's guard is ridiculously useful, Dragon Crushing Fist is one of the strongest feeling moves in the series, Power Slide is absolutely hilarious and comically effective. The tightening on the EX actions context so you aren't just seeing the same ones over and over again is a really nice touch. Tiger is refined and then some to become a fine killing machine. Downsides? Not really any to speak of. I mean, I guess it's slightly slower than the other styles, having its strongest moves tied to charge attacks and whatnot, and Flux Fissure isn't as strong as it used to be. But that'd mean a lot more to me if this style didn't shred through everyone and everything like a knife to hot butter. Actually, you know what? Being able to combo Flux Fissure out of a perfect guard makes it a more consistent move in your arsenal of kill quick moves, as opposed to the single kill quick ability you'll be using constantly. Screw the lower damage, it's more fun to use, and that's what matters. The theme says it all for me. Tiger runs red like blood and ferocious like, well, a tiger. You know how I was so happy about what Pirate Yakuza did for Mad Dog? Lost Judgment did the exact same thing for me, but instead of turning an absolute garbage style into a phenomenal one, it took a kinda mediocre style and broke it in f***ing half. I'm gonna warn you guys right now, I have no downsides to speak of with Crane in this game. I think it is legitimately perfect. As for why, well, that's why I'm here. Not only did this game get rid of bounce blocking, which plagued Crane in the previous entry, but they gave it its own dedicated upgrade tree and filled it with the goofiest, most enjoyable stuff imaginable. Let's get this straight off the rip. Secret of the Crane is the best ability in the game, possibly one of the best in the series. The speed upgrade is actually busted, and it's almost not even funny. I mean, it still is, but, you know, whatever. Sky Dancer, aka being able to jump, is given a surprising amount of love for something that could have been so easily turned into a gimmick or an afterthought. You're immune to knockdowns in EX boost, you dodge in massive bursts, and you can do it 3 times in a row. True Crane Beast Slayer is the funniest name of any move in the series, in my opinion, and that's on top of being an incredible counter launcher. You've got a ton of stylish and effective as hell EX actions, and all that's wrapped together with stylish Taekwondo-style crowd-clearing standard attacks. I think it's legit perfect. I mean, what's there to dislike? It doesn't do as much damage as Tiger does. Okay, you can't charge your finishers, but your ability to hit as fast as you can and wide as you swing, it doesn't really matter if its attacks do a little bit less damage than the designated power style. Crane in this game isn't just good, it isn't just great, I don't think they could have balanced it any better. On top of all of that, it just perfectly complements Yagami's other styles with that secret ability. How did they fucking do it, man? Insert pun about blue stompin' here. I don't know, it's hard to work these song titles into actual... Let's just get to number 1. This video has been a massive undertaking, one I've been wanting to do ever since I finished Yakuza 0 back in 2022. And finally, here we are at the end. You can call it sappy, needlessly melodramatic, whatever you want, but thank you so much for watching this far. Even if you skipped here just so you could be mad that your personal favorite style isn't number 1, that's fine. Just know that this video's been a blast. It's been a lot of things, actually. So, of the 4 Lost Judgment styles, hell, of all of the styles in the entire series, my personal favorite ended up being the Sweet Science. When the King of Kung Fu finally puts away all that fancy garbage and just starts throwing hands, that's when I'm at my peak. Boxer is my favorite style in this series for a large multitude of reasons that I shall now list off in a not-only manner. Not only can it combo into itself via the uppercut, not only does it control more unique than any other style by replacing your light, heavy, and grab with jab, straight, and hook respectively, not only does it deal massive damage when played right, not only is it incredibly fast, not only does it have some of the most immediately memorable moves to me like triple jab and Chizuru Lance, not only does it have one of the most brokenly powerful moves in the game in the form of the Todoroki Rush, not only does it have 3 distinct counters that all serve unique purpose, not only does it have EX Street Rush, not only does its method of acquisition make you engage with the fun as hell side story of the Todoroki Gym, making you divide your attention appropriately between the side content and the main story in harmonious splendor, but the song just fucking slaps, my guy. Downsides. No grab, it's DLC locked on console, and it doesn't contribute to Legend Conqueror. Those are objective points of contention. I really just didn't care about them in my playthrough. Super fast speed, really high damage, massive room for player nuance due to not following the typical light and heavy attack system. Boxer just does it all for me. I know it's not as emotional an ending segment as you might hope from a video like this, even though you may not have wanted an emotional ending at all, but that's the fun part. Boxer shot all the way to the top, not because I had strict emotional connection to it, but because this style was one they just wanted to make. It's not fulfilling a specific combat niche or area because the other 3 styles can cover that. They had fun making it, and it's fun to play. And truly, what else matters? So I'm gonna give credit where credit's due, because I did not make this video alone. Credits to Chaco, my friend, for helping get footage for 3, 4, and 5, helping with script editing, and generally just being a great friend. Credits to Smokey Beef for being the inspiration of this whole video and having 2 videos that are just better than this singular one. Go check them out. He's really good at what he does. Credits to Disciple99, my brother, for script editing and putting up with all of my horseshit. Credits to Random Collection for being an overall great music YouTube channel and the place I got a majority of these songs from. You're the sleeper goat of the Yakuza community, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Credits to MK, Gungshot, Devleon7, Geo Double Dulver, and Iosono Utakuman. To be honest, I stole some of their footage, and I figured they deserved credit because I've done this in the past and not done that. So credits to all you guys. You guys are awesome. And most importantly, I know most credits end this way, but thank you. Yes, you. Dog, you're watching the credits of this video. You didn't have to do that, but you did, and it means a lot to me that I could steal away your eyeballs for a bit. This is the longest video I've ever made. I doubt I'll make a video that's longer than this until I eventually, I don't know, talk about the Chernobyl HBO miniseries or review every song in the Undertale OST, maybe? Look, point is, this video is my love letter to the series, and I'm just glad I got to make it. So thank you, and I'll see you all later. God bless.